Cable systems are a great modality of exercise to introduce to your clients during the latter stages of phase 2 training, which is your movement training, and to continue using them well into stage 3 and stage 4, whether you're training for muscle endurance, hypertrophy, strength, or even into power. Now, the beauty of a cable system is that the newer designs allow these heads to move three-dimensionally, which will help you mimic more closely what the true movement of the joint is in the human body. Secondly, the axis of rotation through the pulley, given its adjustability, can be aligned to parallel what's happening in the joint itself. And then thirdly, when you're working on a pulley system, ones that are sort of ground-based, is that it allows you to integrate the entire kinetic chain. So you're now becoming very functional as opposed to a traditional machine where you're kind of supported within the machine itself, and that in itself loses its functionality. So we certainly want to consider bringing these types of training systems into the early parts of your training and continue to use this as a complement to your free weight training, your machine-based training, and into your explosive type training with your athletes or well-conditioned individuals.
One of the progressions up for the basic push movement pattern is to come from doing a push-up where you're laying in a prone position to be able to do a standing cable press where you're on a ground-based position. Now, for a standing cable press, it requires a lot of core recruitment. So you're using all the muscles through the hip and the core region before you even begin to initiate the pressing from the chest and the shoulder area. So what Fabio is going to demonstrate here is a bilateral cable press. So I want him to stand forward. Now, the foot position here is very important. We want to have a staggered stance with one foot a little bit further forward than the other. This keeps Fabio stable both in the frontal plane and the sagittal plane. So with your feet toe to heel, about hip width apart, keep your feet pressed into the ground, bring both cables forward. And we want to line the cables up so the cables are pretty equal with the shoulder joint. So they're not too high or too low, but so there's this direct line of pull into the shoulder joint and into the chest muscles. Remember to keep the chest elevated. We want to be able to pack that scapula. So as you come back, be able to pack the scapula, create a nice stable base. And remember, we're looking for movement primarily in the transverse plane here. So we want to make sure that the humerus stay in the transverse plane. I'm observing Fabio doing a great job. Keep that chest up. We're bracing through the core, keeping the scapula nice and stable. Now, if I want to have Fabio give a little bit of a challenge, I can have him bring that back leg forward a little bit. I'm just validating, educating. What I'm doing by narrowing that base of support, we're creating more instability, which requires more stability here from the scapulothoracic and glenohumeral joints and more stability from the core region. So this is just a standing bilateral cable chest press. Now, when we come over to unilateral cable press, so maybe you shift over so we can use the right arm here, we want to start out in the staggered stance again with the left foot forward a little bit further forward than the right. That's if we're using the right arm. When we first start this, we want to go contralateral. Right arm, left leg forward, helps create that stability, and also gets into that same right shoulder flexion with left hip flexion, just like we get in the gait movement pattern. So chest up, nice tall thoracic spine, core muscles engaged. We're working on keeping that scapula nice and stable. What we're seeing here from Fabio is the movements primarily coming from the shoulder in the transverse plane. We're keeping that scapula nice and stable in the frontal plane, and so he's driving straight from the chest, keeping the core engaged. Now, an advanced progression of this is to take that right leg forward. So it's right leg, right arm. That's going to create a little more instability. And now we're recruiting both the same side obliques here to create stability as well as the same side hip. Keep that chest up, pack through the scapula, tall thoracic spine, brace through that core. Now finally, one other progression is with the feet pressed into the ground, as we're going to create a little more mobile shoulder. So as Fabio presses, he's going to finish with a little rotation. All we're doing now is we're training that scapula how to move around that rib cage. So in the first phase of this, we're training that stable scapula, that stable scapulothoracic joint. Now we're putting a little mobility to it, where we're training the body how to drive through. So the drive should initiate from the hip, come up through the core, and finish up through the shoulder. And relax. So we start out with a bilateral press. Remember, movement comes primarily from the transverse plane. It's just a standing chest press. The difference is because we're using cables, we're engaging the core as we teach that basic move or that basic push movement pattern. You know, we tend to think of movement patterns and not just exercises. So I always tend to think of this, the challenge with this is I always tend to think of this more as a push and not just a chest press. So we go from a bilateral push pattern, we can go into a unilateral push pattern, which requires a lot more core stability, We can do a unilateral push pattern with an opposite leg forward, that contralateral forward, and then we can go to a unilateral push pattern with that same leg, ipsilateral leg forward. And that's how we can compress the movements. We go from a prone push-up position all the way to standing push pattern for our phase 2 functional strength and movement programming. The next exercise we're going to do are triceps pushdowns using the cable machine and a V-bar. So we're going to demonstrate a couple things that we see commonly that are often mistakes that our clients do incorrectly. We'll demonstrate how to correct them. Then we'll show a couple different variations. So Fabio, let me have you use the V-bar. And I want to stay in a position where I can comfortably spot Fabio. So if I had to, I can give him a little bit of assistance here on the forearm. But first, we're going to demonstrate what we see incorrect with this exercise quite often. The first one, the shoulders elevate up. The clients can't stabilize the shoulders. Also, they allow the shoulders to come forward into flexion. So this becomes much more of a shoulder exercise. Remember, the movement should come from the triceps and the elbows. So we want to remind our clients to pack their scapula, retract through the shoulder blades, so we provide a nice stable platform, keep the chest elevated, and we want to keep the wrists nice and neutral here, so we're not trying to push at the wrist. Another common mistake, as Fabio is going to demonstrate here, is this becomes a wrist exercise. That can put a lot of strain through the radius and ulna. If anybody has carpal tunnel syndrome, that could make it worse instead of working on improving their strength and improving their fitness. So neutral wrist, elbows should be relatively tucked in by the side, shoulders pulled back and retracted and nice and stable, and we're really getting that movement right here all the way through the range of motion of the triceps. Now keep in mind, take a look at Fabio's feet here. One foot's a little bit further forward than the other, and that creates that sagittal plane stability so he's not being pulled forward into the machine or into the exercise. And remember, we want to think about changing our client's foot position, so have them do one set with the left foot and forward and one set with the right foot and forward. Now, the other thing we're going to demonstrate here is this is a V-bar. This is a standard straight bar. What we demonstrated earlier with Fabio was using the V-bar, which uses a little bit more of the medial or middle head of the triceps. By using a straight bar, we can actually do a supinated grip with the wrists up or palms up. What this does is gives us a neutral alignment between the radius and the ulna, so we get more lateral head movement through the triceps. So what Fabio is going to demonstrate is holding this position, maintaining the same alignment of the chest up, core stability, and being able to get the work from the triceps. So let's switch this out. Fabio, let me have you step in there. So when we're doing the triceps push down with the straight bar, I'm going to have Fabio take a supinated grip with the palms up. So we want to make sure that he can see his palms facing him. Chest elevated, nice and tall thoracic extension, one foot a little further forward than the other, bracing through the core to maintain that stability. Now what the triceps with the hands up allows us to do is get a little bit more of that lateral head. But we really need to make sure we keep that chest elevated because there is sometimes a tendency to hunch over. So remember, the movement is elbows, triceps extension, observation to make sure that we're getting the action from the triceps, which is the back of the arm and the elbow, not the shoulder, not the trunk. We're maintaining stability, validating by giving a little bit of kinesthetic feedback or verbal saying you're doing an excellent job, and then educating if we need to change the position or change the movement by any amount. So remember, for the triceps push down on the cable machine, we have a couple different options. We can use a V-bar, which uses the medial and middle head of the triceps, and that's with the pronated grip with the palms down and the wrists in a neutral position. Or we can use a straight bar with a supinated grip with the wrists up, with the palms facing up and the wrists in a supinated position, and that uses more of the lateral head of the triceps. Now the other option is the rope. And what you often see with the rope that's incorrect is people pulling that apart. And what happens as you lose form is as they pull the rope apart, they lean forward, so it becomes a little bit more of a core exercise and not as much of a triceps exercise. Using the rope in that neutral position does allow you to use a little bit more of the lateral head of the triceps. However, we want to make sure we maintain the wrists in a neutral position all the way down. The next exercise we're going to do on the cable machine is the low cable pulley hip adduction. We're bringing the hip towards the midline of the body. We have the ankle cuff on at the lowest point on the cable pulley. Just a little bit of resistance, because a lot of the challenge of this exercise is your client maintaining balance on the stable leg. So we have the cuff attached to Fabio's right leg, so he's doing right hip adduction, and we have him balancing on his left leg. We want to start the progression by having the client hold on to a stable environment, like holding on to the equipment, or you can even use a body bar as a little bit of a balance to help maintain that stability. So we just want to maintain that thoracic extension, lumbar stability, and core stability. Keep that left foot planted into the ground, and you're bringing that right leg across the front line of the body. Remember, the movement is from the hip, so we don't want to see the body rotate. We don't want to see the movement from the left hip, but we just want to see that right hip come towards the midline of the body. We observe, make sure that we're stable through the core, thoracic extension. We validate by reminding our client what we want to see, and we educate by giving feedback and saying, Fabio, you're doing an excellent job. Now, to make the exercise more challenging in that first level progression, I'm going to have Fabio move just a little bit further away from the machine. Now we're going to have him balance and try this. So it's a light weight, doesn't need to be that heavy. So as he does right hip adduction, we're getting a lot of stability here from the left hip abductors. So this is a great exercise if you have runners that have a little bit of hip instability. So we're keeping that left leg planted, stable core, thoracic extension, and keeping that movement coming from that right hip in the frontal plane. Now, if we start seeing him rotate, if I start seeing Fabio rotate and he can't maintain that stability, or he's bringing that right leg across and doing this, that lets me know he doesn't have the stability yet to balance on one leg. I'd move him back to the machine and have him hold on to create that stability. The next exercise on the cable machine is the hip abduction, or the movement of the hip away from the midline of the body. Again, we're using an ankle cuff on the lowest cable pulley we have available, and I'm going to have Fabio begin by holding on for stability, left leg planted into the ground, core stability, thoracic extension, and pulling that right leg away from the midline of the body. Keep in mind, we want to keep it, this angle should be about 40 degrees or less, because if we start going higher than 40, 45 degrees, you're going to get what we're seeing here, which is not hip abduction, but we get lateral trunk flexion. So to keep the movement in the hips where it belongs, what we want to do is focus on keeping the left leg stable, brace, chest up. We don't want to see any rotation from the torso. We can give some validation with some verbal or kinesthetic feedback, and then we can educate on how to either improve the movement or regress it to give more control. With Fabio holding on to the machine, that's where we get the greatest amount of stability. So if we want to increase the challenge and lower the stability to make it more challenging for Fabio, he's not going to hold on, requires a lot more balance, and now as that right hip is going into abduction during the movement, the left hip has to provide a lot more stability. Let's keep that down just a little bit lower, a little bit more controlled, really brace, and nice and stable. Give a nice fire from the glutes, push the left foot into the ground, fire the glutes, control the core. That looks excellent, and that's how we use that MOVE acronym on every exercise that we use with our clients.
One of the 5 primary movement patterns is rotation, and the quintessential exercise for the rotational movement is either a wood chop, which is a top to bottom movement, or the hay baler or the lift, which is a start from the bottom and move up, as if you're tossing bales of hay onto the back of a truck, as if you're chopping a piece of wood with an axe. So these movements obviously are very advanced, and Pete will demonstrate the complete movement, but I'm going to break it down right now into sort of the sequences that you would teach to build up towards that complete integrated exercise or that movement pattern. So to start with, you want to just get your clients doing what's called a spiral pattern, and the idea of a wood chop or a hay baler is just kind of move in this diagonal plane. So a good idea is just to have them standing or kneeling and just doing a motion like this, where they can start with either a short lever, which is with the arms bent, or with a long lever, as I have now with the arms extended. And the idea is to not allow the trunk or the hips to rotate, but just simply move the arms in this plane right here. So once they've got this pattern down, you feel comfortable that they're showing good technique through here, the idea is now to incorporate a little bit of rotation driving through the hips, because ultimately the hips are the locomotor or the driver through which a lot of force is generated. So the idea is to get the hips driving this motion, both coming from the top down or from the bottom up. So the idea here is to keep the thorax positioned directly over the hips and simply let the hips rotate. So if you watch me through this motion, as I come up here and I drop down to this position right here, you notice my trunk is not rotating over my hips. So we can introduce this movement right here, kind of in this plane right here, where there's no rotation through my trunk, but I'm generating all the force coming up and coming down through the hips, through hip flexion through here and hip extension through there. So once I've spent some time teaching this pattern to my clients, and I'm starting to get comfortable with it, starting to see the movement pattern, you can see as I come down and as I come up, my feet are shifting, my feet are pivoting, so I'm loading into this leg right here, pivoting off of this foot, and I'm doing the vice versa when I come up to the top. So once I get comfortable with this pattern, it's now time to progress your clients into the full wood chop, which Pete is going to demonstrate for us. So Pete's going to come through here, and first thing I want to do before I move is make sure he's got the staggered position. He's got his arms extended all the way out, because if his arms are bent, what's going to happen in this movement is he's going to be driving a lot of the movement through his shoulders. Now keep in mind, a rotation does involve a pull and a push, but ultimately we want the movement coming through the hips. So taking the arms straight is going to certainly ensure that a lot of that movement comes through the hips and through the torso and not through the arms, simply pushing and pulling. So Pete's in the position. You can see his starting position right here. Weight distributed primarily into the inside leg. He's a little unloaded in that leg. Arms nice and straight, and he's going to start his wood chop by driving down. And as he pulls down through there, you notice he's swinging down. He's pivoting nicely as he rotates around. His torso is going beyond his hips. He gets up to the top and he rotates his torso all the way through beyond the hips right there. Likewise, as he comes back up here, he rotates his torso past. And he's just doing a few good repetitions. And notice the position of his feet. As he comes down, he's loading from this leg into that leg, and he's allowing his feet to pivot naturally. This will take a lot of practice repetitions because it is a very advanced movement. So the idea is to keep the resistance low. Don't make the movement explosive just yet, and work on the quality of movement. Once your client has demonstrated good movement efficiency in doing this, integrating the entire kinetic chain, then feel free to add resistance. And once you've added resistance, you can then make it more explosive, much like you would in any sort of sports movement, like a golf swing or a tennis serve. The hay baler or the lift is the other rotational movement that we want our clients to sort of perform. And as I said, this, once you've taught that sequence, that spiral pattern, and you've taught the movement of just driving the hips without getting the torso rotation, just like we did on the wood chop, we want to move to the lift, which Pete's going to demonstrate here. So you notice his starting position is now, instead of starting from the top and coming down, he's actually starting from the bottom and moving up. So the resistance will probably have to be a little lighter here because you are working against gravity as opposed to with gravity. So certainly take the weight down on the stack. You notice Pete's in this situation where he's loaded into that front leg. He's going to pivot off that outside leg. His arms are nice and straight through there. Again, we want the rotation happening through the hips and the torso, not through the shoulders. And as Pete's ready, he's just going to slowly rotate up, get a nice swing through there, and come on back down. Nice pivot rotation there, very stiff. He's bracing through. He's getting a beautiful rotation. You notice if his legs, he's loaded on the inside leg. He transitions to load onto the outside leg with that inside foot pivoting as he swings around. So it's perfect rotations right there. And last one. And good. Perfect. Great job. Training the abdominals is a very common but yet very controversial area with our clients. Common mistake made is that we believe doing a crunch type exercise is great for the core, and then sometimes we train the core using external resistance, heavy loads. Let's do a quick review of the anatomy of this area. If you think about your core muscles, their job is to really stabilize the spine. They're stabilizers, not really mobilizers. And given the fact that they have to stabilize the spine throughout a great portion of the day, they really have a greater concentration of type 1 fibers, which means they're trained best the way we would train for muscle endurance. You're either going to use longer duration, sort of more isometric type exercises, or you're going to do higher volume with low resistance. Either way, it needs to be done on an unstable surface. So having your client stand on one leg or having them on an unstable surface or on a stability ball, where you're doing types of exercises where you're going after volume through repetition or volume through duration, is going to be key to training the core. However, when we come to train the abdominals, the movers of the trunk, more mobilizers, these are the ones that generate a lot more force. So if your client is really going after that nice six-pack definition, first of all, apart from the fact they've got to lose weight, but if they want that definition in the muscles, you're going after training the rectus abdominis, the obliques. And those muscles, because they're more mobilizers, have a higher concentration of type 2 fibers. So therefore, they need to be trained with heavier resistance, much the way you would train your biceps and your chest if you decided that you wanted to experience some hypertrophy. So a common exercise in this situation is to do a resisted high cable trunk curl. Now, the idea is to get the person to stand, or they can kneel. In this situation, Pete's standing, and he's going to stand and he's going to try and get a nice job of really engaging these muscles here to get his trunk really in a nice vertical position. And then from here, Pete is choosing to use just a single handle where he's going overhead, and his idea is just to simply curl the trunk, much like you would do on a curl up. And now if you notice, as you see the picture on here, if you see from his side shot, he's getting a nice rounding of his sort of lumbar spine and into his thoracic spine. He's engaging his abdominal muscles against resistance, training them for hypertrophy or for strength. Now, a common mistake made when we see a lot of people do these types of exercises is they tend to lock the back out, and we tend to see a lot of hip flexion. So Pete's now going to demonstrate a bad one. A long lever there where there's not much rounding in the spine, and we're seeing more of a stiff lever coming over, and that's really training the hip flexors, because this is more of a hip flexion movement, but it also puts a lot of stress into the low back. So we don't want to really emphasize this type of training. If you want to train the hip flexors, there's far more effective ways to do it. However, if you're looking to train the abs, make sure that we're getting nice rounding. So he's got his chin coming to his chest, and he's bringing his chest towards his pelvis. That is the way to train your abdominal muscles, with a high cable resistance system. A very functional exercise for the upper back is obviously the chin-up or the pull-up exercise, which Pete's going to demonstrate to us today. Obviously, this is a closed kinetic chain where the platform against which we're pulling is fixed and the body actually moves, much like a push-up. So what Pete will do is he's going to just turn around and he's going to sort of step on up, rise, and you notice that first we're going to start with the traditional pull-up where he's going to have the hands, palms facing away. He's got an under grip with the thumb. Pete's just going to demonstrate with these thumbs if he can take the thumb over the top. That's an over grip position, which some people favor to do. There's a greater chance of you perhaps slipping off the bar. So we're definitely going to encourage you to use an under grip there. And the idea here is, just like we taught you how to stabilize the scapula, is Pete's going to basically bear weight into his body. And when he does that, he's going to really set his scapula. He's going to really retract and depress his scapula. And he's going to hold that position throughout the exercise. Now, Pete will just give me 1 or 2 good repetitions when I cue him to do it. 1 and 2. Now, in this position, go ahead and just rest for a second, Pete. In this position, and I'll come to this side right here, if your client is starting to show some signs of fatigue, the one thing you can do is you can actually spot. Now, we're thinking about our movements. So our M is simply, we want stabilization through the entire kinetic chain. All we're going to have is simply movement up on the shoulder and in the scapula, getting some upward rotation. So that's where we want to see the movement. So any swaying of the body, any kicking of the legs are things that we want to avoid. So the idea here is to stabilize the entire body. So as a spotter, what you can do is if Pete gets ready to take on load again, he's going to set his scapula for me. He's going to cross his legs, take the load on there. As a spotter, I can actually come here, and if he needs a little support, he can actually just push off of me. So there's his repetitions right there, and good. You notice he'll just come back. If you watch his technique, he's simply moving straight up and down. There's no forward swing, and there's no assistance by throwing his knees up into this. Now, we have an option of this. This exercise obviously is going to load primarily into the lats, get into the parascapular muscles of the shoulder. But if Pete reverses to the chin-up position where he's turning his palms out, now we're going to shift the weight of this exercise more into the biceps. So now the biceps will become the prime mover. Typically we'll find a lot of people get a few more reps this way than they do doing the traditional pull-up. But here now we're loading away from the lats and we're going to load more into the biceps. So the same mechanics apply. Pete's going to unload here and he's simply going to pull right up and he's going to get his chin right up to that level of the bar. That's why it's called a chin-up. And he's going to do his repetitions. You notice he's very stable. The only movement he's getting right here is a little bit of shoulder extension with elbow flexion. And that's about what a chin-up does.